Hello, everyone. Absolutely delighted that you can join us this afternoon. My name is Sophie Bridger. I'm from Eden Project Communities, and this session is taken part as part of our Festival of Discovery. And I'm going to be having a wee chat with climate justice activist Zoe Skipper-Reed. Hi, Zoe. How are you doing?
Hi, Sophie. I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Excellent. I'm great, thank you.
Great to be here.
It's very good to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. One of the things I was thinking we could kick off with, because we've got a little bit of time just to talk about actually your experience of activism, particularly as a youth activist and as a climate justice activist. And I thought actually we could start by talking about actually the difference between climate change and climate justice, because I think actually lots of us are here, lots of us who have been involved in environmentalism for a while are familiar with climate change activism, but now we're talking more and more about climate justice. So can you tell me what's the difference? What's it about?
Of course, it's such an important distinction to make. So climate change activism, I would define as more of the framing of climate change as an environmental issue. So that might involve a fixation on carbon, for example, and how we're going to keep global warming down to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So to do with the Paris Agreement. Whereas climate justice, I suppose, is more of a new movement, and it's framing climate change as an issue of social justice. So this will have people and human rights at its core, and it might look at the ways in which climate change has intersectional impacts and also acts as a risk multiplier on many different issues. So, for example, on human mobility, the ways in which people are now being displaced by the impact of climate change, such as sea level rise or water scarcity, and also looking at gender issues and the way it also exacerbates every existing inequality. So that's how I defined climate justice activism.
I think that's a great definition, actually. Particularly, I think looking at it as a multiplier of existing inequalities. I was having a discussion on a previous session as part of the Festival of Discovery with some weather forecasters who put it exactly like that, basically it's people's increased vulnerability through different kind of social inequalities that often makes them really vulnerable to climate change. So that actually feels incredibly important. But let's talk about your background a little bit. How did you get involved in this? People become activists for all kinds of different reasons. So I think you got involved through the climate strikes, is that right?
Yeah, so growing up, I've always actually attended climate strikes and been quite involved with environmental action. My mum worked as a charity fundraiser, so she worked for WWF for a time, and we went to the annual climate strikes. So I started writing letters to Gordon Brown and politicians about climate change. But then in 2019, when the global Fridays for Future marches came about, that's when I really started becoming most engaged at the local level, and then nationally I attended the protests in London. For example, the march in 2019 in September, where globally 6 million people joined. And for me, this was just a really powerful movement. Before then, I'd felt quite overwhelmed by the crisis, the kind of statistics coming out about how I will be affected and others will be affected in my lifetime by climate change. So it was quite a scary experience, and then everyone coming together in London for this strike was just really hopeful and powerful. And it made me realise that so many others cared about the same issues, and that working together we could actually make a difference, while others were still so disconnected. So that's really how I got involved. And then following the marches, I made a commitment to make changes in my own life. So personally, especially surrounding kind of fast fashion habits and eating habits, so going vegetarian, and then taking action in school through my local community. So I was moving into sixth form at that point, and I took on the role as head student. And this kind of gave me access to governance and the head teacher's kind of level. So through this, I decided to propose a environmental policy, my green policy. So this was more tangible changes, such as switching to Ecosia as the school-wide search engine as the default, and this allowed us to plant over 6,000 trees within the first year. And then other changes, for example, making it easy for students to attend climate protests, like kind of less bureaucratic barriers. Yes, and then this has now been taken over to become a school sustainability process. We'll be making changes by 2025 to then achieve impact by 2030. So that's how I got involved, and then since through an NGO called Generation Climate Europe, and also through UN Women UK.
That is fantastic. I love hearing about people's journeys through activism, and it sounds like actually you were, incredibly inspired by other people kind of advocating for change. You tried out kind of what you could do as an individual, but also you've been connecting with other people to create change locally and in your community. And I think it's a really interesting journey, actually. And one of the things that I would like to know if you've ever experienced this. My experience as an activist in the past has felt that sometimes we focus on the small things that we can achieve, and it doesn't always feel like enough when what we're trying to cause change around is very big. So an issue like climate change obviously is enormous and it can be really overwhelming. But did you feel that kind of tension between taking an action at a local level when the problem seems so big? Did you feel that?
Yes, I definitely did. Again, what prevented me initially taking action, I would say earlier on in terms of lifestyle changes, was seeing climate change as such a global issue that I felt needed a high level of response, because it was an emergency that we needed the UN, our global governments, to actually take action to meet the Paris Agreement. But then taking direct action within school, within my own life, I felt gave me a sort of autonomy over how I can make a difference personally, and actually working together to make a better world was possible. So more than causing a sort of eco-anxiety that I can't make a difference, it actually had so many positive multiplier effects on the local community, and having conversations with my loved ones, my friends, other students in school, made me feel that I could be a part of a movement, and that actually local changes, local action is really effective. And it has cumulative impacts over time. So you're not just working alone, you're having the impact of those around you as well as yourself.
That is I think it's such an important message. All of us are needed and none of us can create change alone. And do you think those kind of actions really can make a difference at a local level then?
Yeah, I would definitely say so, especially from my experience in school. I think schools are really the building blocks of society, and that's where you become global citizens. You can think and about global issues, and raise awareness of how we can make change at the local level, and that grassroots change actually is a huge part of the solution. In recognising both that we need system change, we need to put pressure on our governments to make the changes needed to meet the challenge. But the complexity of the issue demands that we also all work in our own lives and work together to make that difference. I'm not sure if I'm answering that well enough, but no, I think at the local level a huge difference can be made.
That's brilliant. And so now you're part of Generation Climate Europe, which again is very much that ethos of, let's work together to try and create a solution. It's a network of youth organizations across Europe working together to help address climate change and to fight for global justice. So that clearly feels very important to you, to connect with other activists to achieve your goals.
Yes, so I joined Generation Climate Europe in April through UN Women UK. I met another delegate, someone on the delegation for what's called the Commission on the Status of Women, who is also interested in climate justice issues. So she involved me in GCE, and again, it's about representing youth voices within Europe, and pushing for stronger action, particularly from the EU, but also any organisations, including MNCs and other NGOs on climate action. So since then, I've been involved in the European Parliament's youth event and working on sustainable development issues. So writing articles, for example. I interviewed Tim Smith from the Eden Project on this, and now working as a project lead on the Climate Justice Report, which again is about focusing on how are young people really affected by climate justice issues. And for example, this year we are having a focus on access to climate litigation, so whether people can access justice through the law system within Europe. And this was really important to me for opening opportunities, and also again building a network where I felt I can learn from others rather than just trying to make changes alone, which put a huge deal of pressure on me. Whereas learning from others, it was a really knowledge building exercise for me. I think because I'd had experience with protest and more kind of direct forms of involvement, instead having people around me who understood environmental policy, who understood how to connect with stakeholders and other NGOs, again, yeah, it was just really helping me to build my own capacity in understanding the issues. And yeah, it just continues to inspire me to meet with others who are so passionate about making a difference.
That sounds incredibly powerful. I could see how that would be such a support. As I mentioned, I was previously a youth activist myself, and I know that I found that network incredibly supportive and powerful. My experience was sometimes that actually it could be very empowering to be sort of held up a little bit and sort of go, oh, here is a young person fighting for change. This is very inspiring. But also sometimes it can be a little bit, in my experience, a bit pigeonholing. Is that still something that you come across?
Yes, I think there can be an enormous pressure placed on young people to be tokens of youth voice, especially because leaders are waking up to the idea that young people need to be involved in decision making. This means that tokenism is an issue I have encountered. But again, being part of a network helped me to overcome this, because we are bringing together the youth voices rather than just being pigeonholed or pointed out as a youth activist or a young leader. It's realizing that we need an equal representation and actually need to have a diverse range of youth voices in part of decision making. I think this is changing, but for example, a huge issue at COP, which I went to earlier in the week, was the lack of youth and marginalised voices in decision making. They weren't given a seat at the table, they weren't given access to the blue zone, and there's certain barriers of privilege, including voluntary roles and unpaid internships, for example, that can really prevent young people from gaining access to the environmental sector or the kind of policy and law sectors, and also a lack of funding. And I think these are real tangible barriers, as well as the issue of just being held as token voices and not actually being listened to.
Yes, and I think the idea of being held up to be a single person to be the voice of youth, I think does a huge disservice both to the person that's being held up and to all the voices that aren't being heard because of that. You know, Greta Thunberg is an incredible voice for a generation, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't listen to other voices as well, and we can't expect her to carry all of that by herself, right?
Exactly. And then in terms of diversity as well, like I can acknowledge my own privilege and that the opportunities I've had haven't been the same as other activists. So even at the climate justice events I've been to, there's still a very distinct lack of diversity, and I think that does speak to the lack of representation, not just for young people, but for other groups.
And particularly when the issues that you're fighting for, you know, climate justice is very much a global issue. It feels wrong that actually there aren't more people from outside the UK, young people from outside the UK being heard as part of that.
Exactly.
Now, one thing I, as a kind of related note, I suppose, is that climate action is starting to feel quite intergenerational to me. It might just be because I can't consider myself a young activist any longer. I'm now definitely just an activist. Climate action does seem to kind of be a good opportunity, though, to bring together the kind of younger voice, you know, the people that have been inspired by Greta Thunberg, and before that, people who are, you know, campaigning for global climate justice, like yourself, as well as people who have been, you know, very involved in this for a really long time, you know, people who've been campaigning on environmental issues since, you know, the 80s, 70s and earlier. So do you think there's a value in bringing those different experiences together? Because I just think you must have such different perspectives and so much to learn from each other.
Yeah, exactly. I think leading on from our kind of last question is that most value can be taken in making decisions surrounding climate justice is from having an intergenerational dialogue. So not just bringing young people to the table, but facilitating a discussion between people who've been working in the field for much longer, since the 80s, when climate action was becoming much a bigger thing, and now only just coming into the world of climate action because it's our future. We have climate change has a disproportionate impact on young people. So we have a right and a responsibility to be part of that process. So yeah, it's bringing together the different ideas and learning from each other, and there's a huge deal of value in that. And I think, for example, a citizens' assembly and other forms of intergenerational dialogues and communication are so vital, and also bringing together different sectors of society across different jobs, careers, and different lived experiences is really vital. One really poignant kind of agenda I've seen from that has been from the UN, who are now having intergenerational dialogues surrounding, it was the anniversary of the General Assembly, and they brought together the priorities of young people, but this was from the Deputy Secretary General, and there was a conversation between the youth delegation and the Deputy Secretary General, and that's been really meaningfully facilitated, I'd say, by the UN.
Wow, that actually sounds totally phenomenal. So, okay, there are a couple of questions I would like to ask you for, basically on behalf of anyone who's watching this, who's thinking, oh, this could be, climate action could be something that I get involved in, climate justice could be something I can get involved in. So firstly, what advice would you say to anyone who wants to get involved in this kind of work or activism?
Yeah, of course. So I think this has taken me a while to figure out as well, because I personally found protest quite tiring, and it can be exhausting because you're putting so much into it, and it's actually quite emotionally involved. Whereas I found working more academically, so for example, article writing was where I could have my most valuable contribution. And also finding a network to collaborate with others, forming a network of like-minded people, a community within your local area or school. You can rely on each other for support and inspiration, and that's how you can really work well together. And then kind of leading on from that is finding a group near you, whether that's a network such as GC, we're actually recruiting at the moment, if there's someone out there who's interested, and also local groups, for example, since joining Durham University, I've joined GreenCom at my college, which is all about seeing the changes in real time at college, the small differences we can make, that all adds up. Joining things like the Eden community, just groups really, I think, what I would say keeps me inspired to keep taking action and to learn more all the time.
I feel like this has been such a thread running through our conversation, actually, the idea that, you know, if you're campaigning for any kind of change alone, things get very hard very quickly. If you're campaigning with others, then you can lift up each other's voices, you can learn more, you can connect, you can help create more change, far more than if it's just one person. That just feels like a theme that's running through for you.
Yes, yeah, I would definitely say that, and that is from personal experience as well. I've seen such a difference in working as a community.
Oh, amazing. In that case, I will ask you one more question. If anyone is watching this live and you have a question for Zoe, then please do put it in the comments that you're watching on Facebook. If you are not watching this live, I'm afraid that will not be an option for you due to the inavailability of time travel, but we would still welcome your comment. So final question, is there anything that you think is particularly helpful to get involved with right now, for example? I think there are lots of different forms of activism available to people. Like, for example, you mentioned actually protest is something that some people find really valuable. Other people like to express themselves through writing, and that's really helpful too. What sort of things do you think are really helpful for people to get involved in?
Yeah, it's a big question, and I do think about this a lot. And while I'd say, again, protest is so important always, and keeping up the pressure, protest continues to kind of show that our MPs are representatives that we still want change. So I think keeping up that pressure is vital going forward. But I would personally say that education is and kind of the ongoing implications of that is the best place to make change at the moment if you're a young person. I think we need our leaders to make the policy changes, but as a young person, our schools, our universities, our local communities, community centres, they offer the baseline of the base of where we can kind of make change from, whether that's very logistical things like increasing recycling or more kind of curriculum based, so bringing in climate education. And I think that's an area that we can continue to work on, and this might even include things like careers talks on where green jobs will be and what will the future look like, and how can we kind of create a world beyond the climate crisis where there's an opportunity for more equality and a safer world and healthier environment for everyone.
That's brilliant. Okay, there's actually one more thing I want to ask you, which goes back to, again, something we said previously about how sometimes all of this is so overwhelming, and actually climate anxiety must be a real issue for you as it is for so many of us. Is it something you deal with? How do you deal with it? Any tips for the rest of us, Zoe?
Yeah, I think like many young people, I do feel the anxiety of climate change. But I think continuing to connect with others, again, going back to the same kind of area of thought, line of thought, is that continuing to learn about what inspires you and focusing on the solutions rather than the problems. Because I think the wonderful thing about the climate crisis is that a better world is possible, and actually, if we use it as an opportunity, we can build a healthier world, and that is so possible. So just continuing to learn about the ways we can all make a difference, and also I've always found that learning about the different ways people make change, whether that's through art, through podcasts, writing books, whether it's contributing through science. I just seen Hannah's comment. Thank you, Hannah. It's continuing to learn about the different ways people can make a difference, and that's really, really inspiring, because everyone can contribute.
That is a wonderful note to end on. I am feeling very inspired right now, and I'm really grateful to you, Zoe, for actually taking the time to come and talk to us about actually your activism, your journey, and how other people can get involved. So a huge thank you from us at Eden Project Communities for taking part. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sophie. It's been brilliant to talk with you.
Oh, brilliant. And for those of you watching, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. This is part of our Festival of Discovery, and you will be able to see the rest of the programme. There is plenty going on, and watch back some of the things that have been put up afterwards, the recordings of those events, at thefestivaldiscovery.com. But for now, we'll say goodbye, and thank you again so much for your time. And thank you, Zoe, for your fantastic insight.
Thank you.